The bus wheezed to a stop, gravel crunching under its tires, sending a swirl of dust into the dry, thin air. Leela Hayes stepped down, adjusting the straps of her pack and squinting against the pale morning sun. The valley stretched endlessly before her, a jagged, unforgiving landscape of high peaks, sharp ridges, and wind that howled like a living thing. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just a training ground. It was a crucible, and everyone here seemed determined to test her in every way imaginable. The officers were waiting. Majors in pressed uniforms, faces lined from years of commanding and judging, watched her arrival with faint, disdainful amusement. Leela's boots crunched against the gravel as she approached the assembly point. Whispers flitted from one to the next, smirks curling like shadows. "She's a city girl," one murmured, barely hiding his sneer. "Does she even know how to carry a pack?" Leela kept her eyes forward. She had heard whispers before, about recruits quitting after the first week, about soldiers broken by the valley's punishing conditions. But this was different. She wasn't here to fit in. She was here to prove something, though even she didn't fully know how far she would have to go. The valley smelled of earth, dust, and cold stone, and the wind tugged at her uniform as if warning her that nothing here would be easy. The first obstacle course was laid out before her like a silent challenge. Ropes dangled over deep mud pits, logs balanced over rushing streams, and walls jutted up like teeth ready to snap at any misstep. The majors stood at the edge, their arms crossed, evaluating. A camera crew, part of the official documentation, clicked quietly in the background, recording the chaos they expected. Leela's stomach fluttered, part fear, part anticipation. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, but she knew the valley had a mind of its own. A fellow recruit, a tall man named Brock, shuffled nervously beside her. "They don't even know what they're doing," he muttered under his breath. "I've been here before. You'll last about 2 hours." Leela didn't reply. She had learned early not to waste words. Her eyes scanned the course. Every rope, every log, every wall could be a trap. One misstep, 1 second of hesitation, and it could be over. Not just her pride, but her body, her stamina, maybe even her chance to finish the training. She tightened her gloves and adjusted the straps of her pack again. "All right, Hayes," one of the majors barked, stepping forward. "Show us what you're made of. Don't embarrass yourself." His tone was sharp, but his eyes, hardened with decades of command, were curious. A ripple of laughter went through the group behind him. Leela's heart thumped in her chest, but she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her boots met the first log, slick with morning dew. Balance became everything. She wobbled once, twice, but corrected herself each time. The mud pit gaped beneath her, dark and waiting like an open mouth. She imagined falling into it, imagined the major's laughter. The thought made her push harder. By the time she reached the rope climb, her arms burned and her fingers were raw, the coarse fibers cutting into her palms. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. Each pull upward was a battle against gravity, against her own exhaustion, against the expectation that she would fail. Around her, the majors exchanged surprised glances. Whispers grew into murmurs. She's holding her own somehow. Even as she reached the top, she didn't pause. Momentum carried her across the next challenge, a narrow plank over rushing water. The wind gusted, testing her balance, tugging at her sleeves, threatening to push her off course. Leela's heart raced, each step measured, precise. One slip could undo everything. Her boots skidded once, and for a heartbeat the valley seemed to yawn beneath her, ready to claim her. But she steadied herself, pushing forward, refusing to look down. The final wall loomed. Tall, imposing, and smooth, it seemed designed to mock those who tried to climb it. The majors watched in silence now, a tense quiet replacing their earlier mockery. Leela placed her hands against the rough surface, feeling every groove and crack. Her arms screamed in protest, but she forced herself upward inch by inch. Each movement was agony, each breath a test of endurance. The summit felt impossibly far. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, wild and indifferent. Leela glanced down for a second, dizzy from the height, and then forced her gaze back up. The major who had mocked her at the start stepped closer, mouth opening as if to scoff. But he didn't. Something in her posture, in her relentless drive, had shifted his expression to uncertainty. For a moment, the valley itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, with one final surge of strength, she pulled herself over the top. Mud-streaked, panting and trembling, Leela collapsed onto the ground. The majors were silent. The other recruits stared, some wide-eyed, others incredulous. She had done what they didn't think possible, what they had assumed no city girl could do. And yet, even as she caught her breath, a shadow moved along the cliffs above. The wind whispered a warning she couldn't ignore. The valley had other tests waiting, tests the majors didn't even understand. Leela's eyes flicked upward, a flicker of doubt creeping in. The first day had been survived, but the valley had only just begun. The dust swirled around her boots once more, as if alive, whispering secrets and threats in equal measure. Somewhere out there in the crags and hidden crevices, the true challenge waited. Leela clenched her fists, her heart still hammering. She would not fail, not here, not yet. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the peaks, the valley waited to see if she was truly unbreakable. The first night in the valley had barely passed, and Leela Hayes felt every ache as if it were branded into her bones. Her muscles throbbed in protest, her fingers stiff and raw, and her lungs still burned from the morning's obstacle course. The sun hadn't yet risen, but the majors were already moving, their boots crunching over gravel, each step a reminder that nothing here waited for rest. "Hayes," barked Major Calloway, tall and sharp-eyed, a veteran whose mere presence seemed to drain warmth from the air. "Line up, now." Leela adjusted the straps of her pack and joined the line. Around her, recruits fumbled with equipment, their exhaustion clear. The majors circled like hawks, each inspection a silent judgment. Leela's gaze flicked over the valley beyond, rocky ridges, hidden ravines, and a river cutting through the terrain like a silver scar. This wasn't just a training ground. It was a battlefield disguised as a wilderness. "The first test is endurance," Calloway announced, his voice cold, echoing across the open ground. "You will navigate the entire ridge system, retrieve a supply pack, and return before sundown. Fail and you leave. Quit, and you're never coming back." The whispering began. Some recruits shook their heads. Others clenched their fists, steeling themselves. And Leela, despite her fatigue, felt a flicker of anticipation. This was what she had trained for, her chance to prove herself against not just the valley, but the men who doubted her. The first steps were deceptively calm. The path wound up rocky slopes, dust rising with each footfall. Leela's pack weighed her down and sweat ran into her eyes. A gust of wind cut across the ridge, sharp and icy. She braced herself, gripping a jagged rock to steady her footing. Below, the valley stretched like a labyrinth, every turn hiding unseen challenges. She couldn't falter, not if she wanted to survive the day. Brock, the tall recruit from the previous day, stumbled beside her. "You're holding up better than I thought," he muttered, wincing as his ankle twisted. Leela's eyes flicked to him, a brief nod acknowledging the struggle without slowing her pace. Every step, every careful placement of her boots was a negotiation with gravity itself. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, turning the valley into a furnace. Mud caked her boots, sweat streaked her cheeks, and her muscles screamed at every incline. Yet she refused to pause for long. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, the majors were watching, their eyes sharp, measuring, predicting failure. And every time she looked forward, the path seemed to stretch endlessly, the ridge twisting into a maze designed to test not just stamina, but mental fortitude. The river came into view, a swirling, frothing ribbon of ice-cold water slicing through the valley. Supplies waited on the opposite bank, barely visible in the shimmer of sunlight. Recruits hesitated, some considering the danger. One misstep could mean a broken bone, or worse. Leela took a deep breath, the chill of the wind biting her lungs, and began the crossing. Her boots slipped on slick stones. A scream rose from the group behind her as one recruit almost fell, but she kept her balance, heart hammering like a drum. The other side brought no relief. Cliffs rose ahead, their surfaces jagged and unforgiving. Leela hoisted herself up, gripping crevices that cut into her palms. Pain surged through her arms, every sinew burning. Behind her, shouts and laughter mixed. Some recruits had given up, others struggled, and the majors watched with a blend of skepticism and grudging intrigue. Leela gritted her teeth, refusing to let her body obey the instinct to collapse. Hours turned into a grueling crawl. The supply pack she retrieved was heavier than expected, straps cutting into her shoulders. Her vision blurred from exhaustion, yet she pressed on, navigating unseen paths, bypassing treacherous ridges, and calculating each step like a chess player moving through a battlefield. Somewhere in the distance, a rock slide thundered down a slope, sending echoes that made her pulse spike. The valley wasn't passive, it was alive, testing her in ways no human command could. By late afternoon, fatigue threatened to overwhelm her. Each breath came in ragged bursts, each step a negotiation with gravity. Her hands bled from gripping rocks, her legs shook from climbing, yet she refused to slow. The thought of the major's doubt of their earlier mockery fueled her forward. She wasn't just fighting the valley, she was fighting the assumptions of everyone who had underestimated her. The summit loomed. Beyond it, the path curved toward the final stretch, but as she rounded the last ridge, the ground beneath her shifted. A hidden crevice yawned unexpectedly. One misstep and she could plunge into the dark void below. Her heart leapt into her throat. She froze, assessing the gap, her breath echoing in her chest. The valley waited silently, indifferent to her struggle. With a measured breath, Leela leapt, landing hard but steady on the far edge. Pain shot through her leg, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to tilt. She stumbled, catching herself just in time, mud and gravel sliding under her boots. She swallowed hard, chest heaving, eyes scanning the horizon. The valley had almost claimed her, but she had survived. Behind her, a ripple of stunned silence rose from the other recruits. The majors, usually quick with scorn, were quiet too. Calloway's expression was unreadable, a mixture of disbelief and begrudging respect. For the first time, she had earned a pause, a moment where her determination was undeniable, even to those who doubted her most. And yet, even as she breathed, catching ragged air and wiping the mud from her eyes, a low rumble echoed through the valley. Dust and stones shifted along the cliffs. The wind picked up, carrying an ominous warning across the jagged peaks. Leela's pulse quickened. The valley wasn't done testing her. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, and her arms threatened to collapse, but she knew one thing. Survival meant moving forward. One misstep, one hesitation, and she could lose everything. Every fiber of her being told her the valley had more in store, more pain, more danger, more challenges that would push her past every limit she thought she had. Yet she pressed on, every step deliberate, every breath measured. This was only the first test, and already the valley had nearly broken her. But Leela Hayes didn't break. She wouldn't, not here, not yet. And somewhere beyond the next ridge, something stirred, something watching, waiting, and ready to challenge her in ways even the majors couldn't predict. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, painting the valley in hues of crimson and gold, but the beauty did nothing to ease Leela Hayes' growing unease. Shadows stretched long and menacing across the rocky terrain, twisting in shapes that seemed almost alive. The temperature dropped sharply, cold seeping into her bones and wrapping around her like a living thing. Her muscles, already battered from the day's grueling endurance test, ached, and her fingers, stiff and scraped, trembled slightly as she adjusted the straps of her pack. The majors had vanished for now, leaving the recruits to fend for themselves through the valley's first nightfall. But absence was not safety. The legends of the valley were whispered even among the bravest soldiers, stories of recruits lost in the darkness, swallowed by hidden crevices, or trapped by sudden storms. The wind began to howl, weaving between the cliffs like an invisible predator, carrying the distant echo of unseen creatures. Leela tightened the straps of her pack and wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, not just from cold, but from the gnawing sense that the valley was alive, testing her still. She found a sparse fire pit among jagged rocks and set about gathering dry wood. Her fingers, stiff and bleeding from the morning's climbs, struggled to hold the splintered branches. Sparks flew, catching the dry twigs, and the fire sputtered to life with a fragile hiss. Its small warmth was comforting, but the shadows it cast seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting in ways that made her stomach knot. From somewhere up in the cliffs, a howl echoed, a deep guttural sound that made her pulse jump. It was too low and forceful to belong to any ordinary animal. Leela froze, her breath catching in her throat, eyes scanning the darkening ridges. The valley held predators, both natural and human, and the night amplified their presence. Every sound, the rustle of rocks, the distant rush of water, the snapping of a dry twig, set her nerves on edge. She wasn't alone. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Just for a second, a shadow flitted along a cliff face, disappearing before she could focus. Her heart pounded and her mind raced. Was it a recruit who had gotten lost? Or was it something else, something the valley didn't want her to see? She swallowed hard, telling herself to stay calm, but the primal fear of the unknown gripped her tightly. Leela shifted her pack closer, feeling the reassuring weight of the supplies she had carried through the ridge system. Survival wasn't just about muscle. It was about preparation, observation, and quick thinking. She rummaged through her kit, checking her water, ration packs, and a small flashlight she had tucked away. Every item could mean the difference between life and death in a place like this. The hours crawled by, each minute stretching longer than the last. Shadows moved in ways the light shouldn't allow, and the wind carried whispers she couldn't quite understand. Leela hugged her knees to her chest, teeth chattering, ears straining for anything out of place. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. She froze, holding her breath, imagining every scenario. A falling rock, a wild animal, a fellow recruit in trouble. The valley was testing her mind as much as her body. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle, every distant howl kept her alert. She thought of the majors' mocking faces, their disbelief at her morning performance. They hadn't seen her spirit, her ability to endure, and the valley seemed intent on revealing just how far she could push. A creeping realization took hold. She couldn't rely on anyone but herself. No one would come to save her. Survival was hers to claim alone. Suddenly, movement in the shadows, a pair of glowing eyes reflecting the firelight. Leela froze, staring, her heart hammering. The figure stepped closer, revealing itself to be another recruit, Brock. His expression was pale, almost ashen, eyes wide with panic. I can't, the ridge, it collapsed, he stammered. His voice trembled. You're still here. Leela nodded, trying to mask the adrenaline flooding her system. Stay close, she whispered, her voice firm despite the fear curling in her stomach. Keep your eyes open. The valley, it doesn't forgive mistakes. The night stretched longer, the temperature dropping further. The wind became a predator, hurling dust and loose stones across the rocky terrain. Leela could feel the valley testing her endurance, her resolve, her ability to make split-second decisions in life-or-death conditions. Every step taken to fetch firewood, every glance into the darkness demanded total concentration. Hours passed. The moon rose, silver and cold, illuminating the craggy landscape. Somewhere in the distance, another howl split the night, closer this time. Leela's pulse raced. Her senses sharpened, every nerve alert, every muscle coiled for action. She had survived the day, but the night was proving to be its own merciless test. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the peaks, a new challenge revealed itself. A section of cliffside had crumbled overnight, creating a yawning gap in the path she would need to traverse. Rocks and dirt shifted precariously, threatening to cascade into the valley below. Leela's mind raced, cross it or find another way. Either choice carried risk. One wrong move, one miscalculated step, and the valley could claim her. She inhaled deeply, feeling the chill of the morning air burn her lungs. The fire had died down, leaving her shivering, but she knew she couldn't wait for warmth or comfort. Survival meant action, and the valley had already proven it wouldn't wait. With a final glance at the shadowed ridges, she began to climb, every movement deliberate, testing the stability of the rock beneath her fingers and boots. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her fingers ached from gripping the rough surface, but she pressed on. The valley loomed above and below her, indifferent to human struggle, testing her endurance, her courage, and her sanity. Behind her, Brock followed, hesitating at every precarious foothold. Leela's jaw clenched. She couldn't afford to be slowed, not by him, not by fear, not by exhaustion. The valley would break the weak, and she had made a promise to herself she would not be one of them. Halfway across the treacherous cliffside, a sudden gust of wind tore through the valley, rattling loose stones and sending them clattering down into the void below. Leela froze for a heartbeat, heart in her throat, eyes wide. The ground shifted beneath her hand. If she fell now, there would be no rescue, no second chance. Her heart pounded. She swallowed, shaking off the fear, and pressed forward inch by inch, refusing to let the valley see hesitation in her movements. Her breath came in ragged gasps, every sense alert, every nerve screaming with tension. And then a crack, a low, ominous sound that echoed across the canyon. The ridge was unstable. The cliffside groaned as if alive, threatening to give way beneath her. Somewhere deep in the shadows of the valley, the night had one final test waiting for her, and Leela Hayes had no idea if she could survive it. The valley had a way of gnawing at the soul. Leela Hayes felt it now, every muscle trembling, every breath burning her lungs like fire. Hours of climbing, scrambling over jagged rocks, and navigating hidden crevices had pushed her body past its limits. Her fingers bled from gripping rough stones, her knees were raw from scraping against jagged surfaces, and her lungs screamed for air with every inhalation. The sun had long vanished behind jagged peaks, and darkness crept in, swallowing everything in its cold embrace. She had hoped to reach the summit before nightfall, but the valley wasn't finished testing her. A section of cliff had collapsed overnight, forcing her to find a detour along a narrow, crumbling ledge. Rocks shifted underfoot, and every misstep threatened to send her tumbling into the chasm below. Her heart hammered like a drum in her chest as she clutched the cliffside, teeth gritted against the pain shooting through her arms and legs. Behind her, Brock's hesitant footsteps echoed. He had nearly given up hours ago, but fear had forced him to follow. Leela didn't look back, she couldn't. She didn't have time for distractions. Survival demanded focus, every ounce of strength, every flicker of courage. The majors were watching, their silent scrutiny sharper than any blade. One misstep, one falter, and they would write her off as another casualty of the valley. The wind picked up suddenly, slicing through her jacket, biting into her skin. Dust and loose stones tumbled past her face, stinging her eyes. Leela's gloves were torn, fingers raw, but she refused to stop. The valley had been cruel, relentless, but she had survived this far by refusing to bend. Her determination burned brighter than exhaustion. She pressed on, one agonizing step at a time. A miscalculation sent her ankle twisting on a loose rock. Pain lanced through her leg, sharp and blinding. She stumbled, catching herself just before plunging into the darkness below. Her chest heaved, her vision swimming with dizziness. She dropped to her knees, trembling, hands pressed to the jagged cliff for support. Tears of frustration stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying wouldn't save her. It would only slow her down. Memories flickered in her mind. Her brother cheering her on during childhood games, her mother telling her she could do anything she set her mind to, the countless hours spent training alone when no one believed she would make it this far. Those memories became fuel, igniting a fire that overrode her pain. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself upright. The cliffside beneath her feet groaned, loose rocks shifting like the valley itself was testing her resolve. The final ascent loomed ahead, a sheer wall of rock, jagged and slick with the valley's relentless moisture. The supply pack she carried threatened to pull her down with every move. She placed her hands carefully, testing each crevice before committing her weight, muscles screaming in protest. One slow, deliberate pull, then another. Her fingers ached, nails torn and bleeding, but the summit was within reach. She could see the faint outline of the ridge above, the goal she had fought so hard to reach. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, voice trembling but fierce. "You're not done, you're not broken." But the valley wasn't finished. A sudden rockslide erupted above her, sending gravel and larger stones crashing down. Leela froze, heart in her throat. Instinctively, she ducked, letting debris rain around her. One rock grazed her shoulder, pain flaring through her body. The wind howled louder, carrying the scent of wet stone and danger. The valley was alive, testing her in ways she hadn't anticipated, forcing her to choose between fear and action. Her mind raced, calculating every movement, every foothold, every handhold. Time slowed. The valley's indifference became palpable, like a predator circling its prey. Her body screamed to stop, to collapse, but she pushed on, refusing to yield. Pain, fatigue, fear, all of it was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was moving forward. She reached the edge of the wall, a jagged lip that would take her over the summit. Her legs shook violently, nearly giving out under the strain. Her hands slipped, and for a terrifying heartbeat she hung precariously, the abyss yawning beneath her. Every muscle burned, her fingers slick with blood and sweat, her lungs on fire. Yet she gritted her teeth, focusing on the next move, then the next, then the one after that. Finally, she hauled herself over the edge, collapsing onto the summit. Mud, blood, and sweat coated her, and her entire body trembled violently from exhaustion. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, eyes watering, but she was alive. She had made it. She had survived the valley's most brutal test so far. And yet, even at the top, relief was fleeting. The valley stretched endlessly beyond her, jagged and unforgiving, a landscape that seemed to mock human perseverance. The wind whipped around her, carrying a low, menacing groan that sounded almost like a warning. The summit was not the end. It was just another challenge. Leela lay on the ground, trembling, trying to gather herself. Every muscle screamed in protest, every joint ached. Yet she couldn't allow herself to rest for long. She knew the majors were watching, silent but unforgiving, waiting for any sign of weakness. She had proven she could endure physically, but could she withstand what the valley would throw at her next? Her fingers brushed against a small, jagged rock beside her. She picked it up, tracing its rough surface with numb fingers, thinking of the countless obstacles she had already overcome. Her mind sharpened, clarity cutting through the fog of fatigue. She realized something crucial. The valley wasn't trying to break her entirely. It was testing her limits, pushing her to discover strength she didn't know she had. A shadow moved across the summit, a figure she couldn't immediately identify. The wind carried footsteps, soft and deliberate, approaching from the ridge beyond. Her pulse quickened. Was it Brock, another recruit, or something else entirely? Leela forced herself upright, muscles trembling, and readied herself, pack heavy on her back, eyes scanning every inch of the valley. The first day had ended, but the night, and the valley, was far from over. Every challenge she had faced had brought her closer to the edge of human endurance. Every misstep could have been fatal, and somewhere beyond the ridge, the valley waited to see if she could push past not just physical pain, but fear itself. Leela Hayes had survived the breaking point. She had clawed her way through exhaustion, terror, and the valley's merciless tests. But she knew deep down that the hardest challenges were still to come. Somewhere in the shadows, waiting silently, the valley had prepared its next test, a challenge that would not only push her body, but threaten to unravel everything she had fought to achieve. And for the first time, Leela understood. Survival in the valley wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about heart, determination, and the unbreakable will to keep moving forward, even when everything inside screamed to give up. Morning broke over the valley with a harsh, white light, washing the jagged peaks in a glare that burned Leela's eyes. She was battered, her uniform caked in mud, her muscles still trembling from the previous day, but something had shifted inside her. Exhaustion had sharpened her focus, fear had honed her instincts. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning, adapting, becoming something the valley and the majors hadn't accounted for. She rose cautiously from her makeshift camp, surveying the terrain. The previous night's shadows had retreated, but the valley's dangers remained. Hidden crevices yawned beneath the ridges, loose stones threatened to slide with every step, and a thin mist clung stubbornly to the cliffs, making visibility treacherous. But Leela didn't hesitate. Every detail she observed, every subtle shift in the landscape, became a piece of a mental map she was constructing, one that could turn the valley's merciless terrain to her advantage. Water had been her first concern. Yesterday's exertions and the stormy night had left her dehydrated. Her pack held minimal rations, enough to keep her alive, but she needed a sustainable source if she was going to survive the next days. Moving along the river that cut through the valley, she noticed a narrow creek branching off, hidden behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Its water was clear, flowing swiftly, but it wasn't obvious unless you were paying attention. Most recruits would overlook it in favor of the main river, where exposure and risk were far greater. Leela knelt by the creek, testing the water's temperature with her fingers. She quickly realized that she could filter it using the cloth in her pack, a trick she had learned during a wilderness survival course back home. The valley had provided her with raw materials, she just had to recognize them. As she worked, she felt a spark of triumph, the first real victory since arriving. The valley had underestimated her observation skills. While tending to the water, she noticed movement along the ridge above. It was subtle, a ripple of dust, the shift of a shadow, but her instincts screamed that she was being watched. Her pulse quickened and she crouched low, using the rocks as cover. From this vantage point, she could observe without being easily seen. The majors were circling, evaluating her performance from a distance, but she wasn't the same recruit they had mocked at the start. She had learned to read the valley, to anticipate danger, to turn her weaknesses into strengths. Brock appeared, limping and exhausted, though still alive. His eyes widened when he saw her crouched beside the hidden creek. I didn't think anyone else would make it," he stammered, voice wavering. "How did you?" Leela gave him a tight nod. "Observation, patience. Don't underestimate what the valley has to offer," she said. Her tone left no room for argument. She had learned quickly that survival was as much about cunning as it was about endurance. With fresh water secured, Leela moved on, her mind constantly calculating. Each ridge, each boulder, each shadow became a puzzle piece. She noticed weak rocks that could provide footholds or cause a slide, gaps in the terrain that could be navigated to avoid exposure, and narrow paths overlooked by the majors that could shorten her route. The valley had assumed she would be like every other recruit, predictable, panicked, desperate, but she was neither. She was becoming a strategist in her own right. By midday, she stumbled upon a supply cache left for recruits, tucked away behind a large boulder, partially hidden by brush. Others might have passed it without a second thought, but Leela saw the potential immediately. Food to sustain her, extra gear to patch her torn uniform and gloves, and even a small first aid kit that could make the difference between life and injury. Her heart swelled with quiet satisfaction. She had discovered her first secret weapon, the valley itself. Carrying the supplies carefully, she paused to observe the majors from a safe distance. They were still skeptical, still mocking her silently, but she could see the flicker of surprise in their eyes. One of them, Major Calloway, scribbled notes in a small notebook, furrowing his brow. He had expected fear, weakness, hesitation, and instead, Leela was turning every challenge into an opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same terrain meant to break her was now giving her the tools to survive. Her mind raced as she navigated a particularly treacherous section of cliffs, using her knowledge of the hidden creek to stay hydrated and her keen observations to avoid unstable rock formations. Each step was deliberate, calculated, almost surgical in precision. The valley's harsh beauty, once a source of fear, had become a guide, a secret map visible only to those who paid attention. Then, as she rounded a ridge, something caught her eye, a shadow moving unnaturally along a cliff face. She froze, scanning carefully. The movement was deliberate, almost predatory. Her pulse spiked. Was it Brock following at a distance, another recruit, or something else entirely? She couldn't risk making assumptions. Survival demanded vigilance. Clutching the supply pack tightly, she crouched behind a boulder, watching the shadow. It moved closer, but not recklessly, methodically, calculating her position. Her fingers trembled slightly as adrenaline coursed through her veins, but her mind remained sharp. Every instinct honed through exhaustion, and danger told her that the valley was still testing her, still probing for weakness. Hours passed and Leela used the terrain to her advantage, moving stealthily from rock to rock, creek to ridge, conserving energy while remaining unseen. Her confidence grew. She was no longer simply surviving. She was mastering the valley, learning its patterns, reading its whispers, and anticipating its dangers. Every misstep by the other recruits, every falter, every moment of panic reminded her how far she had come. As the sun began to dip again, painting the valley in muted gold, she found a high perch overlooking the main training area. From here, she could see the majors, the other recruits, the twisted paths of the valley stretching endlessly. She allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The valley had underestimated her, and now it was giving her an edge they hadn't anticipated. But even as she stood there, surveying her small domain, she knew the real challenge was still ahead. The valley's tests were far from over, and the major's skepticism had not yet turned to acceptance. One miscalculation, one lapse in judgment, and all her hard-won advantage could vanish in an instant. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the first low rumble of the day's next trial. A distant avalanche, a wall of rock and debris cascading down a hidden ridge, threatening to cut off her path. Her pulse spiked. The valley wasn't done. It had one final test for her today, and she would have to rely on every ounce of cunning, every observation, and every instinct she had sharpened over the past grueling days. Leela Hayes had discovered her secret weapon, the valley itself. But the valley had secrets yet to reveal, and survival would demand more than strength. It would demand genius, courage, and an unbreakable will. The avalanche hit without warning. A deep, resonant roar tore through the valley as a wall of jagged rocks and debris thundered down the far ridge. Leela Hayes froze for a heartbeat, heart pounding in sync with the violent rumble. The ground beneath her vibrated as if the valley itself were shaking in fury. She gritted her teeth and pressed herself against a jagged boulder, adrenaline flooding her veins. Survival demanded quick thinking, not panic. One false move, and the valley would claim her. Behind her, Brock stumbled, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. We need to move," he yelled, voice almost lost amid the roar. Leela shot him a sharp glance. "Stay low, watch the rocks, follow my lead." Her voice was calm, commanding, yet every fiber of her body screamed in protest, aching from exhaustion, bruised from previous days, every step already a battle against gravity, fatigue, and fear. The avalanche's fury shifted unpredictably. Smaller rocks cascaded across her path, forcing her to adjust instantly. Her boots slipped on wet mud and loose gravel, but she pressed forward, hands clawing at jagged edges of stone. Behind her, Brock fumbled, nearly falling, and she reached back instinctively, gripping his wrist and hauling him upright. "Keep moving," she urged, voice low but insistent. "We don't have time for hesitation." Above them, the majors had appeared, observing the chaos with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. Calloway's eyes narrowed, not in mockery this time, but calculation. They hadn't expected anyone to navigate the avalanche safely, least of all Leela, the city girl they had dismissed. Yet here she was, moving with precision, exploiting every ridge, every crevice, every foothold the valley offered, turning danger into opportunity. Leela led Brock through a narrow pass, the avalanche's roar reverberating off the cliffs like thunder. Dust and debris stung their eyes, wind ripped at their clothes, and loose rocks tumbled dangerously close. Every instinct honed through the past days, observation, patience, calculated risk, was on full display. She moved like a predator, silent, precise, and relentless. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, Leela noticed a small overhang along the cliffside. It was barely visible, concealed behind jagged rocks, yet it offered shelter from falling debris. She darted for it, pulling Brock along. They huddled under its narrow protection, mud and dust raining around them. Leela's chest heaved, muscles trembling, but she allowed herself a brief moment of relief. This is insane," Brock gasped, voice shaky. "I thought we were done for." Leela shook her head, eyes scanning the valley for the next danger. "The valley tests us every step of the way," she said, voice firm. "If you wait for it to be safe, it'll kill you." Her gaze hardened, reflecting the fire that had driven her these past days. She had survived exhaustion, darkness, hidden crevices, and now the avalanche itself. And yet, she knew the Majors still didn't fully comprehend the force they were dealing with. The overhang gave them a moment to catch their breath, but the roar of rocks subsided only slightly. Ahead, the final stretch of ridge awaited, narrow, unstable, and unforgiving. One slip, one moment of hesitation, and the valley could claim both of them. Leela's mind raced, calculating the safest route. Every detail of the terrain, the angle of the rocks, the placement of loose boulders, the path of the river below, was a variable in her survival equation. The Majors moved closer, their faces etched with tension. They weren't mocking now. They were watching, analyzing, taking mental notes on a recruit who had defied every expectation. Leela felt their eyes like heat on her back, but she didn't flinch. Her focus was absolute. She had learned that in the valley, fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Confidence, precision, and adaptability were her weapons. The ridge narrowed dramatically. Loose gravel slid underfoot, threatening to send them tumbling into the gorge below. Leela adjusted her pack, breathing deeply, and took the lead. Step by step, she inched forward, testing each foothold, balancing against the force of the wind that tore across the cliffs. Brock followed close, mirroring her movements, though his steps were hesitant and uneven. Suddenly, a jagged rock shifted under Leela's weight. She felt the ground slip slightly, heart leaping into her throat. Time seemed to slow, every muscle tensed. With a calculated pivot, she adjusted her footing, using her hands to brace against the cliff. A stone scraped along her palm, cutting her slightly, but she didn't falter. She was alive, and she wasn't about to let the valley win now. At the same moment, a shout came from above. Major Calloway's voice echoed down the cliffs. "Hayes, move. There's a safer path ahead." But Leela didn't need instruction. She had learned to read the valley for herself, to anticipate danger, and to act before anyone could intervene. She nodded silently to Brock, signaling him to follow her lead as they navigated the final treacherous stretch. The summit of the ridge was within reach. The wind tore at her clothes and whipped dust into her eyes, but she pressed forward, muscles trembling, every fiber screaming in exhaustion. She reached the top first, turning to haul Brock up behind her. His grip slipped once, but she caught him, hoisting him over the last ledge. Both of them collapsed, panting, mud and blood streaked across their faces and uniforms. The Majors approached cautiously, their expressions unreadable. Calloway's eyes, hard as stone moments ago, now reflected something else: respect, disbelief, and perhaps a touch of awe. "Hayes," he said, voice low, tight with tension, I didn't think you'd make it." Leela didn't respond immediately. She simply stood, chest heaving, eyes scanning the valley below. She had survived the avalanche, the treacherous cliffs, and the skepticism of every Major in the camp. The valley had tested her in ways she could barely articulate, yet she had emerged unbroken, stronger and sharper than before. And yet, even as the adrenaline faded, she sensed it. The valley wasn't done. Somewhere beyond the peaks, new dangers waited. She could feel them in the wind, in the shifting rocks, in the silent patience of the cliffs. The Majors had underestimated her, yes, but the valley had not. Leela Hayes had survived the confrontation, defied the Majors' expectations, and navigated near death itself. But in the valley, survival was only the beginning. The real trials, the ones that would test heart, mind, and courage, were still ahead. The valley had shifted overnight, as if it had been waiting for this precise moment. Rain pelted down in relentless sheets, bouncing off jagged rocks and carving tiny rivers into the soil. Mist and fog blurred the cliffs, reducing visibility to mere feet. Leela Hayes pressed herself against a rock face, the cold seeping into her bones, water running down her uniform and cutting through her gloves. Every movement was an effort, muscles trembling, lungs burning, but she didn't stop. The storm was the valley's newest test, and she had no choice but to face it head-on. Thunder rolled across the peaks, low and ominous, vibrating through her chest. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the jagged ridges for a fraction of a second, revealing treacherous drops and hidden crevices she would need to navigate. Her mind raced. One wrong step and the valley could end everything in an instant. She clenched her jaw, tightening the straps of her pack and forcing herself forward. Fear was present, but it had been transformed into focus. The valley had tried to break her physically, mentally, and emotionally, and now she met it on equal terms. Brock stumbled behind her, shivering violently, his hands shaking as he clutched the cliff. I can't keep going," he gasped, voice barely audible over the roar of rain and wind. Leela shot him a look that brooked no argument. "You have to. Don't let the valley decide your fate. Keep moving one step at a time." Her words were firm, but underneath them was a quiet current of empathy. She understood fear intimately. She had felt it clawing at her with every heartbeat. But survival demanded resolve. The terrain grew worse. Loose rocks shifted with every step, slick from the downpour. Narrow ledges disappeared under sheets of rushing water. The storm seemed almost alive, a predator testing her limits, and Leela moved as though anticipating its every strike. Her fingers, already raw and bleeding from previous climbs, gripped rocks for leverage. Every movement demanded precise calculation. She adjusted her footing mid-step, twisted her body to maintain balance, and forced herself to remain calm amid the chaos. Lightning illuminated the valley again, and in its brief glare, she saw the Majors observing from a distant ridge. Calloway's eyes were sharp, but there was a flicker of uncertainty, a realization that Leela was no longer a recruit to be mocked. The storm had become a proving ground, and she had mastered it in ways the others had not. Hours passed in a blur of rain, mud, and relentless focus. Leela had learned to conserve energy, choosing each movement with strategic precision. She could hear the faint cries of other recruits somewhere below, struggling, faltering, disappearing into the valley's embrace. The storm was impartial. It would take the weak, spare the adaptable, and reveal the truly unbreakable. The ridge narrowed suddenly, reduced to a jagged spine of rock no wider than a boot. The wind tore through it, threatening to hurl her into the mist-shrouded abyss. Leela paused, heart racing, eyes scanning every inch. One wrong step could mean death. Her legs trembled violently, muscles screaming, but she forced herself forward, shifting her weight slowly, deliberately. Step by step she advanced, the storm lashing at her like an angry specter. Brock followed cautiously, but a sudden gust knocked him sideways. Instinctively, Leela lunged, grabbing his arm and anchoring him against the ridge. He coughed, water dripping into his eyes, but she didn't let go. "Focus on your footing. Look at me, not the storm," she shouted over the roar, her voice cutting through the chaos. He nodded shakily, following her lead as they crept along the perilous spine. Lightning struck a ridge nearby, sending a shower of rocks tumbling down. Leela ducked instinctively, pressing Brock down as stones ricocheted past. Their breath came in ragged gasps, muscles quivering with exertion, but they pressed on. The valley had pushed her body to the brink, tested her mind with isolation and fear, and now it demanded endurance under the storm's wrath. Hours blurred, the sky darkened further, and exhaustion began to threaten control. Yet something inside Leela had changed. The valley had tried to break her, and it had failed. Every trial, every near fall, every scrape and bruise had hardened her resolve. She wasn't merely surviving, she was evolving. The storm became an ally of sorts, forcing her to see clearly, to act decisively, to trust her instincts like never before. A sudden crack echoed above. The ridge ahead was unstable, loose and slick with rain. Leela's heart skipped a beat, calculating the risk instantly. She could attempt to climb around it, but the narrow path left little margin for error. She inhaled deeply, letting the fear sharpen her senses. Every step had to be perfect, every movement deliberate. The valley would not allow mistakes. Step by step, she crossed the unstable section. The wind howled, threatening to push her off balance, and her boots slipped on slick stone. Her fingers tore against rough rock, blood mixing with mud, but she pressed on. Each movement was a negotiation with death, a test of precision and nerve. Behind her, Brock's shaky footsteps echoed her own, and she guided him through with clear, calm instructions. Finally, they reached a small plateau. The storm's intensity slightly lessened here, though rain continued to fall in sheets. Leela collapsed to her knees, body trembling violently, mud and blood streaking her face. Brock leaned against her, panting, barely able to speak. Leela didn't answer immediately. She allowed herself a few moments to breathe, to take stock of her victory over the storm. From the distant ridge, Major Calloway approached, rain plastering his uniform to his skin. He didn't scold. He didn't mock. He simply watched, his expression unreadable but undeniably impressed. "Hayes," he said finally, voice low but carrying weight, "you've changed the game." Leela looked at him, chest heaving, muscles trembling, eyes burning with determination. She didn't respond with words. Instead, she straightened, shoulders back, standing tall despite every ache, every wound, every fatigue-driven tremor. The valley had tried to break her mind, body, and spirit, and she had survived. Not merely survived, but adapted, mastered, and risen above every expectation. Yet even in this moment of triumph, Leela knew the valley was not done. It was relentless, unpredictable, and merciless. The storm had tested her endurance, her courage, her ingenuity, but the final challenge, the one that would truly define her, still awaited somewhere beyond the peaks. Leela Hayes had conquered the storm within the valley, mastered fear, and defied expectation. But the ultimate test, the one that would prove whether she was truly unbreakable, was still to come. The valley was silent. For the first time since Leela Hayes had stepped onto its jagged slopes, the storm had passed. Mist clung to the cliffs like a veil, the sun cutting through in sharp, golden beams. But silence in the valley was never peaceful. It was a warning. Every recruit who had faltered, every misstep that had nearly claimed a life, had proven the valley was a relentless teacher. And now, standing on a narrow ridge, Leela sensed the final trial approaching. Ahead, the valley opened into a vast chasm. A precarious bridge of rock, barely wider than a boot, spanned the gap. One misstep, one slip, and the drop would be fatal. Beyond it, the majors waited on the far ridge, silent observers of her final test. Calloway's eyes, intense and calculating, scanned her every move. For weeks, they had mocked her, doubted her, tried to break her. But now, their skepticism met the reality of her skill, endurance, and willpower. Leela squared her shoulders, boots gripping the slick rock beneath her feet. The bridge trembled slightly under the gusting wind, loose stones shifting with every step. Her muscles screamed from exhaustion, her fingers raw and bleeding, her lungs still burning from days of relentless trial. But she didn't hesitate. She had faced exhaustion, avalanches, nightfall, storms, and near-death falls. She had learned the valley's patterns, exploited its secrets, and mastered her fear. One step at a time, she advanced. Halfway across, a loose boulder gave way beneath her foot, sending a cascade of rocks clattering into the abyss below. Leela froze for a heartbeat, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to step back, to abandon the crossing, but she didn't. She recalibrated instantly, planting her boot on a stable section, gripping the rock beside her. Her body was trembling, but her mind was razor-sharp. She had learned to trust instinct and precision above all else. Brock followed, his steps faltering. I can't," he stammered, frozen in terror. Leela glanced at him, eyes fierce, voice unwavering. "You can, focus. One step at a time. The valley tests fear, but it rewards those who master it." She extended a hand, helping him find balance. Slowly, carefully, they pressed forward together. The chasm seemed endless, but Leela refused to let panic take control. Above, the majors watched in tense silence. The mocking smirks of the first day were gone, replaced by a grudging respect that none of them would voice yet. Calloway's gaze followed every step, every adjustment, every calculated movement. Leela had become more than a recruit. She was a force, a demonstration of endurance, intelligence, and sheer will. Suddenly, the wind shifted violently, threatening to unbalance her. Rain from the previous storm had left the rock slick. Leela's boots slipped slightly. Time slowed. She could feel the abyss below, a dark, gaping void threatening to consume her. And yet, fear had been transmuted into focus. She gritted her teeth, pressed her fingers into cracks in the stone, and forced her body forward. Every movement was deliberate, precise, unwavering. One step from the far side and disaster nearly struck. A rock shifted beneath her boot. She faltered, but instinct, honed over days of relentless trial, took over. With a calculated leap, she landed solidly on stable rock. Her heart raced, muscles shaking violently, but she was alive. She had crossed the valley's final natural obstacle. The Majors approached slowly, boots crunching on stone. Calloway stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing, assessing, weighing. The valley had tested her body, her mind, her fear, but this final judgment was different. She had survived every trial, but would she withstand the scrutiny of those who had doubted her from the beginning? "Hayes," Calloway said finally, voice low and resonant, "you've exceeded every expectation. You've not only survived the valley, you've mastered it." His tone carried weight, respect, and the faintest trace of awe. Few recruits, if any, could navigate these trials. You've done it flawlessly. Leela's chest heaved, the adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. Blood, mud, sweat, and rain streaked her uniform, hair plastered to her face, but she held her head high. This was more than physical triumph. It was the culmination of endurance, courage, and unbreakable determination. She had faced the valley, and she had emerged unbroken. A wave of emotion crashed over her, relief, pride, disbelief, but she didn't allow herself to falter completely. The valley had been merciless, yet she had learned its lessons, turned danger into opportunity, and discovered the limits of her own resilience. Every bruise, every scrape, every agonizing step had forged something stronger inside her. Calloway gestured toward the other Majors. Their expressions were a mix of astonishment and silent acknowledgement. The mocking, dismissive attitudes of days past had evaporated, replaced by a recognition of her strength. For the first time, Leela was no longer the underdog, the city girl, the recruit they doubted. She was a force, proof that determination, intelligence, and heart could overcome the most relentless trials. Brock, still catching his breath, looked at her with admiration, awe, and relief. I never thought we'd make it," he admitted softly. Leela nodded, offering a tired but genuine smile. "You survived because you didn't give up," she replied. "The valley rewards those who keep moving forward no matter what." As the sun broke fully over the peaks, painting the valley in gold and shadow, Leela stepped forward, taking in the vast landscape she had conquered. Every obstacle, every challenge, every moment of near defeat had led her to this point. The valley had been a crucible, and she had emerged refined, sharpened, unbroken. And in that moment she understood the truth. Strength wasn't just measured in endurance or skill. It was measured in resilience, courage, and the unyielding will to face every trial head-on. The Majors had mocked her. The valley had tried to break her, but Leela Hayes had survived, and in doing so, she had rewritten every expectation, every doubt, every whispered prediction of failure. The valley was conquered, but more importantly, Leela Hayes had conquered herself. And no force, man or mountain, would ever underestimate her again.